Jack Harper lived alone on a small farm nestled in the valley, surrounded by acres of green fields and tall trees. His life was simple, and he liked it that way. Each day, he worked hard to care for his land, tending to the crops and animals that kept the farm running. The sun set early in the evening, and the quiet countryside came alive with the sounds of nature, the chirping of crickets, the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was peaceful, and Jack enjoyed the solitude. That evening, as Jack finished up his work, the sun had already dipped behind the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the sky. The air was crisp, with the faint smell of earth and hay. Jack wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand and stepped out of the barn, ready to head inside for a late dinner. But something caught his attention, a faint movement out in the fields. Jack paused, his hand still resting on the barn door. He squinted into the distance. At first, it looked like a shadow, but it was too small to be a deer or one of the farm animals. Curious, Jack walked toward the field. As he got closer, he could see the shape more clearly, a small figure stumbling across the tall grass. "Hey, are you all right?" Jack called out, his voice calm but concerned. The figure didn't respond at first. It was a child, maybe 6 or 7 years old, wearing a torn shirt and ragged pants. The child looked up at Jack with wide, scared eyes, but didn't say anything. The poor little thing was covered in dirt and looked exhausted, like it had been walking for a long time. "Come on, let's get you inside," Jack said gently, kneeling down in front of the child. The boy didn't speak, but he nodded and reached out to take Jack's hand. Jack helped him to his feet, noting how light the child felt, like he hadn't eaten or had enough rest. They made their way to the farmhouse, and as they entered, the warmth of the kitchen greeted them. Jack motioned to the chair by the stove. "Sit down here. I'll get you something to eat," Jack said, trying to make the boy feel comfortable. The child didn't move much, but he sat down slowly, looking around the room like it was the first time he had seen anything so calm. Jack turned to the stove, his mind racing with questions. Who was this child? Where had he come from? And why was he out there alone at this hour? As Jack prepared a small meal, some stew he had made earlier in the day, the boy remained quiet, his eyes darting to the window from time to time. There was something about the way the boy acted that made Jack uneasy. It was as if he was expecting someone, watching the night for signs of movement. But there was no one, just the quiet, the darkness, and the sounds of the farm. Jack set a bowl of warm stew in front of the boy and smiled. "You need to eat, it'll help." The child looked at the food, then back at Jack, before finally picking up the spoon. He took a slow bite, his eyes still darting around the room. Jack didn't press him with questions. He knew the boy had been through something difficult, and sometimes silence was the best comfort. "What's your name?" Jack asked after a moment, trying to break the silence. The boy hesitated, then answered quietly, I don't know." That answer made Jack pause. A lost child with no name? It was strange, but something told him that this situation wasn't just a coincidence. The boy had clearly been through a lot, and Jack was determined to help him. The night was far from over, and Jack had a feeling that whatever had brought the boy to his farm was only the beginning of something much bigger. "It's okay," Jack said softly. "We'll figure it out tomorrow. You're safe here for now." As the boy slowly finished his meal, Jack kept a watchful eye on the windows, his mind racing with questions and worries. Something was out of place, and Jack had a feeling that the quiet of the farm was about to change forever. Jack watched the boy carefully as he finished his meal. The child was quiet, not speaking much, and he seemed lost in thought, staring at the fire flickering in the stove. The warmth of the kitchen was comforting, but there was still something unsettling about the way the boy kept glancing toward the windows. It was as though he was waiting for something or someone. The silence between them stretched on, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Jack wanted to ask the boy where he came from, why he was alone, but something told him not to push too hard. The boy wasn't ready to talk. Jack wiped his hands on his jeans and sat down across from the child. "You must be tired," he said gently. "How about we get you some rest? You can sleep in the spare room tonight." The boy didn't respond at first, but after a long pause, he nodded slowly. Jack stood and walked over to the hallway, motioning for the child to follow. The house was old, but it was warm and welcoming. Jack led the way to a small bedroom at the back of the house. The bed was simple, with a worn quilt and soft pillows, but it was clean and comfortable. "You can sleep here for the night," Jack said, turning on the light and opening the door. "I'll make sure you're safe." The boy stood in the doorway for a moment, still not saying a word. His eyes scanned the room, but he didn't move forward. Jack noticed that he seemed uncertain, like he wasn't sure whether it was okay to enter. "It's all right," Jack said softly, trying to reassure him. "You're safe here." After another long moment, the boy stepped into the room. He moved slowly, as if unsure of his surroundings. Jack pulled the quilt back and smoothed it over the bed, then motioned for the boy to lie down. "Get some sleep," he said kindly. "We'll figure things out in the morning." The boy hesitated again before climbing into the bed. He pulled the covers up tightly around his shoulders, his eyes still wide, scanning the room one last time before he closed them. Jack stood at the door for a moment, watching the boy, but he knew there was nothing more he could do for now. Just before Jack turned to leave, the boy whispered in a voice so soft that Jack almost didn't hear it. "They're coming." Jack froze, his hand still on the doorknob. The boy's words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Jack's heart skip a beat. Who was coming? And why had the boy said it with such fear in his eyes? Jack wasn't sure what the boy meant, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. Something wasn't right. "Who's coming?" Jack asked, his voice gentle but firm. The boy didn't answer. His eyes were closed now, but his body was still tense, as if he was waiting for something. Jack hesitated, but then he turned and quietly closed the door behind him. He leaned against the wall in the hallway, trying to process what had just happened. What had the boy meant by their coming? Who were they? Jack tried to shake off the unease that had settled in his chest. Maybe it was just the boy's imagination, or maybe he had been through something so frightening that he didn't know how to express it. But the more Jack thought about it, the more he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had a sense that the quiet of the night was about to be shattered, and whatever was coming, he didn't know if he would be able to stop it. With a deep breath, Jack turned and went back into the kitchen, but the unease lingered. He checked the windows, locking each one carefully. The night was still, but the air felt heavy, as if something was waiting just beyond the edge of the darkness. It wasn't long before Jack heard something outside, a sound he couldn't quite place, a faint rumbling that seemed to grow louder with every passing second. Jack's heart raced as he moved closer to the window. What was that sound? And why did it seem like the boy had known it was coming? Jack didn't have the answers, but one thing was certain. The boy's presence had changed everything. And whatever they were, Jack was about to find out. The night stretched on, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He kept his eyes on the windows, his mind racing with questions. Who was this boy, and why did he seem so afraid? Jack had lived on this farm his entire life, and nothing like this had ever happened before. Everything around him was quiet, the only sound being the occasional creak of the house settling or the rustling of trees outside in the breeze. The boy had fallen asleep, but Jack couldn't rest. The boy's words, "They're coming," echoed in his mind, growing louder with each passing minute. Who were they? Why had the boy been so sure of it? Jack had seen plenty of strange things in his life, but this felt different. It felt like something was about to change, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. With a sigh, Jack moved away from the window and paced the floor. The farmhouse had always been a place of comfort for him, but tonight it felt more like a prison. He felt the walls closing in, the quiet stretching thin, like the calm before a storm. He tried to shake off the feeling, but it wouldn't leave him. There was something about the boy that didn't sit right. He was too quiet, too watchful. The way he looked around the room, the way he barely touched his food. It was like he didn't trust anyone, like he expected something to happen at any moment. Jack rubbed his hands over his face, trying to push the thoughts out of his mind. He needed to focus, to stay calm. The boy needed help, and Jack wasn't about to turn him away. Even if things fell off, the boy was safe here, at least for now. Tomorrow, Jack thought. I'll figure this out tomorrow. But as he looked at the clock, the minutes dragging by, Jack couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his gut. The house was too quiet, and the night too still. The sounds of nature that usually brought him peace now only seemed to heighten his anxiety. The wind had picked up, making the trees outside bend and sway. Jack walked over to the door, looking outside again. The driveway was empty, just a stretch of gravel leading up to the main road. But something felt wrong. The darkness felt heavier, like it was waiting for something. Jack stepped back inside and checked the locks on the doors and windows one more time, even though he knew it was pointless. What am I so afraid of? He asked himself, but deep down he knew something was coming, and he wasn't sure if he could stop it. He made his way back to the kitchen and grabbed a cup of coffee to steady his nerves. As he sat at the table, sipping the hot liquid, his mind wandered back to the boy. The poor thing looked so small and lost. Jack couldn't imagine what he had been through to end up alone in the middle of the night. But there was more to this story. Jack could feel it. Just then, a faint sound reached his ears, a low rumble, like an engine in the distance. It was almost too quiet to hear, but it was enough to make Jack's heart race. He stood up, setting the cup down, and walked to the window. The rumble grew louder, closer. Jack's hand gripped the windowsill, his knuckles white. The sound was unmistakable now. Military jeeps. He could hear the engines, the hum of tires against dirt, the faint clang of metal. It was the same sound he had heard earlier, only much louder. Jack's mind went into overdrive. Who were they? Why were they here? And what did it have to do with the boy? The unease in his stomach grew stronger, and he knew that whatever was happening, it was happening now. He moved quickly, grabbing a flashlight and heading for the back door. He had to make sure the boy was safe. He had to know if he was still asleep or if he had heard the sounds too. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, the sound of the jeeps was unmistakable. It was getting closer, and Jack could see the headlights bouncing in the distance. He knew it wouldn't be long before they reached the farm. With a quick glance toward the house, Jack made his way to the boy's room. But when he opened the door, the boy was gone. Panic surged through Jack's chest as he rushed into the room, scanning every corner. Where could he have gone? The window was still shut, and there were no signs of a struggle, but the boy wasn't there. Jack's heart pounded in his ears. What did this mean? The rumble of engines grew louder. It was too late. They were here. Jack stood frozen in the doorway, his heart racing. The boy was gone. The bed was still made, the covers neatly pulled back, but there was no sign of the child. Jack's mind raced as he stepped into the room, searching every corner for any clue of where the boy could have gone. The window was shut tight, and nothing seemed out of place. It didn't make sense. The boy had been right there, just moments ago. The sound of the military jeeps outside was growing louder, their engines roaring like thunder in the distance. Jack glanced nervously toward the window, the cold night air drifting in through the cracks in the walls. He had to find the boy, but where could he have gone? There were no other doors or hidden passages in the house. The child couldn't have left without Jack noticing. A faint noise caught Jack's attention. It came from the hallway outside the room. Jack's breath caught in his throat, and he quickly moved toward the door, his footsteps quiet on the wooden floor. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. Was someone else in the house? Could the boy have left and returned without Jack hearing? He crept into the hallway, the dim light from the kitchen casting long shadows across the floor. He stood still for a moment, listening carefully. The sound was soft, almost like a whisper, but it was enough to make his skin crawl. It came from the direction of the back door. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Was someone outside, or was it the boy trying to sneak away? He moved cautiously down the hallway, his eyes scanning every corner, every dark spot in the shadows. As he reached the back door, he hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the doorknob. What was waiting for him outside? The military jeeps were closer now, their headlights cutting through the night like searchlights. They would be here any minute. Jack knew he had to act fast, but he had no idea what he was walking into. Taking a deep breath, he turned the handle and stepped outside. The cold night air hit him like a punch to the chest. The faint rumble of the jeeps echoed in the distance, their engines sounding like they were just down the road. Jack's eyes darted around the yard, but there was no sign of the boy. He scanned the dark trees and the long stretch of grass, hoping to catch a glimpse of any movement. Nothing. And then from the shadows, he heard it, the soft crunch of footsteps on the gravel. Jack's head snapped toward the sound, his heart pounding in his chest. A figure emerged from behind the barn, moving quickly and quietly, as if trying not to be seen. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the figure. It was the boy. "Hey," Jack called out, his voice low but urgent. "Where are you going? It's not safe out here." The boy froze at the sound of Jack's voice. For a moment, he didn't move, standing still in the shadows like a deer caught in the headlights. Jack took a step forward, trying to make the child feel safe, but the boy took a step back, his eyes wide with fear. "You can't go out there," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "They're coming. The soldiers, they're looking for you." The boy didn't answer. He simply stared at Jack, his eyes full of fear and confusion. It was clear that he didn't understand why Jack was trying to stop him, but there was something in the boy's eyes that made Jack feel that he needed to protect him. Jack moved closer, his footsteps slow and deliberate. "You don't have to be afraid. I'll help you," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But you need to come inside. It's not safe out here." For a moment, the boy seemed to consider Jack's words, but then, without warning, he turned and bolted across the yard, running toward the edge of the property. Jack's heart sank. He couldn't let the boy run him off. The soldiers would be here any second, and the boy would be in danger. Without thinking, Jack sprinted after him, his boots pounding on the gravel as he chased the child. He called out to him again, but the boy didn't stop. Jack pushed himself harder, running faster, trying to catch up before it was too late. The sound of the jeeps grew louder, and Jack knew they were closing in. He reached the edge of the property just as the boy disappeared into the trees. Jack took a deep breath and followed, determined not to let the child slip away. Jack's feet pounded against the forest floor as he pulled the boy along, his heart racing with every step. The trees seemed to close in tighter with each passing moment, casting long shadows that twisted like dark fingers reaching out to grab them. The only sound was the rustling of the leaves beneath their feet and the distant growl of the military jeeps, still closing in. Jack's mind raced. He needed to find a way to lose them, to keep the boy safe. The boy didn't speak as they ran. His small hand was tightly clasped in Jack's, his breathing shallow, but he kept pace without hesitation. Jack could feel the boy's fear, could see the tension in his body. There was something about the boy, something that told Jack he had been running for a long time, long before he ever showed up at Jack's farmhouse. Jack didn't know the full story, but he could feel it in his bones. This wasn't just about escaping the soldiers. Something much bigger was happening, something that neither of them fully understood. Jack glanced over his shoulder. The sound of the jeeps was closer now, too close for comfort. The lights of their headlights cut through the trees, and Jack could see faint flashes of movement in the distance. He knew they couldn't keep running like this. The forest was thick, but it wouldn't hide them forever. They reached a small creek, its waters rushing past in a quiet roar. Jack pulled the boy to a stop, crouching down beside the water. The boy's hand slipped from his grip, and he immediately moved to the edge of the creek, staring at the rushing water. Jack followed his gaze, seeing how fast it moved, how it seemed to swirl and pull everything in its path. "We need to cross," Jack said, his voice low. The boy didn't answer, but he nodded, a small, barely noticeable movement. They stepped into the creek, the cold water rushing over their boots as they crossed. Jack's mind was still on the jeeps. They were getting closer, and time was running out. He had to think fast. As they reached the other side, Jack looked around, trying to find a way to hide. The trees were thick here, but the ground was soft and uneven, making it hard to find solid footing. Jack's gaze flicked around, scanning the area for a place to take cover. Then he spotted it. A large rock formation a few yards away, hidden behind a cluster of trees. "Over here," Jack whispered, grabbing the boy's arm again and pulling him toward the rock. They moved quickly, slipping between trees and ducking under branches. Jack's heart raced in his chest as they reached the rock formation, a natural wall of boulders and dense undergrowth. He pushed through the underbrush and led the boy behind the rocks, crouching down low to avoid being seen. They were both breathing heavily now, their bodies tense and their movements careful. Jack pressed his back against the cold rock, listening intently for any sounds from the military jeeps. The distant hum of the Jeep's engines was still there, but now it was faint, fading into the background. Jack felt a small wave of relief wash over him, but it didn't last long. He knew this wouldn't stop the soldiers for long. They would be searching, sweeping through the forest, and it was only a matter of time before they found them. The boy was trembling now, his small body shaking with fear. Jack glanced at him, noticing how the boy's eyes were wide, filled with a mix of exhaustion and terror. He wanted to comfort him, to tell him that everything would be okay, but he didn't have those answers. Not yet. All he could do was keep moving, keep protecting him, and hope that somehow they would make it through the night. "You're safe here for now," Jack whispered, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. The night was far from over, and the danger wasn't gone. The soldiers could still be out there, searching the woods, and they had no way of knowing what would happen next. The boy didn't respond, but Jack could feel his grip tighten on his sleeve. They waited, listening for any sounds that might signal danger. The minutes stretched on, the quiet of the forest surrounding them like a thick fog. Jack's eyes flicked around, scanning the darkness. He knew they couldn't stay hidden forever, but for now, all they could do was wait and hope that the soldiers wouldn't find them in the thick, dark woods. The minutes passed slowly as Jack and the boy crouched behind the rocks, listening to the quiet hum of the night. The sound of the Jeeps had faded, but Jack knew it wouldn't be long before they started searching the woods. The forest around them was thick, its dark shadows hiding more secrets than Jack could understand. Everything felt uncertain, like the world itself was holding its breath. The boy sat next to Jack, his knees pulled up to his chest. His eyes were wide, darting around as if expecting danger to leap from the darkness at any moment. Jack's own mind was racing. The boy had been right to run. There was something about the soldiers that didn't sit right with him. Why were they looking for a child? And who were they really? The forest felt alive in the night. The wind rustled the trees, and the sound of distant animals seemed to echo through the air. But the quiet wasn't peaceful. It felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. Jack knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. He had to decide what to do next. He glanced at the boy, whose face was pale in the moonlight. "We need to move soon," Jack whispered. The boy didn't respond, but his eyes met Jack's, a silent understanding passing between them. They were in this together, for better or worse. Jack stood slowly, trying not to make a sound. The boy followed suit, his small body stiff with fear. "We can't stay here," Jack said, looking around. The rock formation had provided some cover, but they couldn't rely on it much longer. The soldiers would be thorough. They always were. "Do you know where we're going?" the boy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a flicker of hope in his eyes, but it was clear he didn't know what would happen next. Jack didn't have the answers either. All he knew was that they had to keep moving, that staying in one place could be even more dangerous than running. "No, but we'll figure it out," Jack replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. He wasn't sure what to expect, but one thing was certain. They couldn't stay in the forest forever. They needed a plan, but Jack wasn't sure what that plan was yet. He glanced back toward the direction of the Jeeps. The lights were still visible in the distance, their beams flickering through the trees. It wouldn't be long before the soldiers were upon them. Jack knew they had to move quickly. "Follow me," he said, starting to walk through the underbrush, careful not to make any noise. The boy followed, his small feet barely making a sound as they moved deeper into the forest. Jack's mind was running through possibilities, his thoughts moving in a blur. Where could they go? Who could help them? His farm was too close to the road, too easy to find. They needed somewhere safer. As they moved further into the woods, Jack tried to push his fear aside. His only focus now was the boy's safety. They needed to get away, far away from the Jeeps, far from whoever was searching for the boy. Jack didn't know who was after them, but he couldn't let them catch the boy. Not after everything he had seen in those wide, scared eyes. The forest seemed endless, the trees stretching high above them like silent sentinels. Jack took a deep breath, pushing forward. The boy was still close behind, but Jack could feel his unease, his hesitation. They didn't have much time, and Jack didn't know if they were running towards safety or deeper into danger. Either way, there was no turning back now. Jack's feet moved quietly through the underbrush, his senses heightened. every sound seeming to echo in the silence of the forest. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, but Jack barely noticed. His focus was on the boy, who was trailing just behind him, eyes wide and scanning the shadows. They had been moving for what felt like hours, the forest growing denser as they pushed deeper into the woods. The distant hum of the jeeps had faded, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were still being hunted. Somewhere out there, the soldiers were searching, and he couldn't let them find them. Not yet. Jack turned his head briefly, glancing at the boy. The child was struggling to keep up, his small legs unable to match Jack's long strides. Jack slowed his pace, trying to make it easier for the boy to follow. "Are you okay?" Jack whispered. The boy nodded, though his face was pale with exhaustion. He didn't speak, but Jack could see the worry in his eyes. The fear was still there, just beneath the surface, but there was something else too, a quiet determination. The boy wasn't giving up. They continued moving, their feet crunching softly on the forest floor. Jack's mind raced as he thought about what to do next. The night was growing colder, and the trees seemed to close in around them. It was getting harder to navigate, and Jack knew they couldn't keep running aimlessly forever. They needed to find somewhere to rest, somewhere safe. But where? As they moved forward, Jack noticed a faint light up ahead. His heart skipped a beat. Was it another group of soldiers, or maybe someone else who could help? He couldn't be sure, but he had to investigate. He motioned for the boy to stay quiet and moved toward the light. They approached cautiously, the glow becoming clearer as they neared. It wasn't the harsh beam of a military jeep, but a soft, steady light, almost like a lantern. Jack crept forward, keeping to the shadows, his eyes scanning the area. He reached a small clearing and saw an old cabin in the distance. The light was coming from a small window. It seemed abandoned, but Jack couldn't take any chances. He had to check it out. "Stay close," Jack whispered to the boy, who nodded without a word. They carefully approached the cabin, moving as silently as possible. The door was slightly ajar, and Jack hesitated before pushing it open. The soft creak of the door echoed in the stillness of the night, making both of them freeze for a moment. Jack peered inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The cabin looked empty, but there was a warm fire burning in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. The walls were covered in old, weathered wood, and dust hung thick in the air. Jack stepped inside slowly, his hands still gripping the boy's, guiding him into the safety of the cabin. The boy seemed to relax slightly, his tense body unclenching for the first time in hours. Jack looked around, searching for anything that might tell them who owned the cabin or if it was safe to stay. But everything seemed abandoned. The fire was the only sign of life. Jack sat down by the fire, pulling the boy closer to the warmth. They both needed rest. For now, the cabin seemed like the safest place to hide, but Jack knew it was only a temporary refuge. Sooner or later, the soldiers would find them. The question was, how long could they stay hidden here before they had to run again? They weren't safe yet, but for the first time in a while, Jack allowed himself to breathe a little easier. For now, they had a moment of peace, but in the back of his mind, he knew the danger wasn't over. It had only just begun. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls of the cabin. Jack sat on the floor near the flames, his back against the cool stone of the fireplace. The boy, now sitting next to him, stared into the fire, his small face illuminated by its warm glow. The tense, hurried moments of the night seemed to have slowed down here, in the quiet of this small, forgotten place. But despite the warmth, Jack felt no comfort. The danger was still out there, lurking in the darkness. Jack glanced over at the boy, who seemed lost in thought. His eyes were wide, but there was a quiet calmness about him now, as if the fire and the shelter had brought some temporary relief. Still, Jack could see the boy's hands trembling slightly, though he did his best to hide it. Fear was written on his face, in the way he held his body, but it was different now. It wasn't as desperate as before. Jack wondered what had happened to him, what kind of life he had lived before all this began. But now was not the time to ask. There were more important things to focus on. Jack rubbed his eyes, exhausted from the long night of running and hiding. He had hoped they would be able to rest, but even here, in the relative safety of the cabin, Sleep seemed impossible. The fear of being found haunted him, and he couldn't quiet the thoughts racing in his mind. How long could they stay here? How much longer before the soldiers realized where they were? The boy shifted beside him, his voice barely a whisper. Do you think they're still out there? Jack hesitated before answering. He had no way of knowing for sure, but the way the night had gone, he was certain the soldiers were still looking. They might be, Jack said softly. But we can't worry about that now. We need to stay hidden, keep quiet, and rest. The boy nodded, though Jack could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Are we safe here? The boy asked, his voice cracking slightly. Jack wanted to promise him that they were, but the truth was, he couldn't make that promise. Nothing was certain anymore. He shook his head slowly. I don't know. We have to stay alert, stay ready. But for now, it's the best we've got. The boy seemed to take this in, looking down at his hands. Jack could feel the weight of the silence between them, thick and heavy. It wasn't a silence of comfort. It was the kind of silence that made you aware of the danger still out there. Jack could hear the wind rustling through the trees outside, but it was just a reminder of the world beyond the cabin walls, a world that was still hunting them. Jack stood up and walked to the window, peering through the small crack in the wooden shutters. The forest outside was dark, with only the faintest light from the moon breaking through the thick branches. There was no sign of the soldiers, but Jack knew they could be close. They wouldn't stop searching. He had to figure out their next move. The boy joined him at the window, standing quietly beside him. Jack could feel the boy's presence, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about protecting the boy, keeping him safe from whatever threat was chasing them. As Jack stood there, watching the shadows of the trees dance in the moonlight, he realized something. There was no way to outrun this forever. Sooner or later, the soldiers would catch up to them. But for now, in the stillness of the cabin, they had a moment of peace, a small moment to breathe before the storm came again. Jack could only hope they were ready when it did.